Yep, okay, so it'll work when the stream's live.
Okay.
I don't know why it is that way. Yeah,
Okay. So you can't mute it on the screen.
yeah.
All right. So you'll just have to chat for a second before it starts. It'll be on Zoom. It'll be on the stream.
That's fine. Okay. Hey, John, can you hear us now? There we go.
Yeah? Okay.
Great. I'm going to turn this mic off.
But now I can't hear you. He can hear you now. He can hear us, but now I can't hear him.
No, I was muted. Hold on.
There you are. Okay.
And last, I'm going to try to connect to my earbuds and see if that
Yep.
says connect. It's not.
Awesome. And you can
Try
see
that.
me looking at you?
And John, you can see Lucy?
Oh, no. Okay.
No.
Oh, not yet.
Well, this could be like a phone call.
So,
Just let him know that you'll
yes.
Lucy short.
So I'm sitting in a chair in our nave, John, looking at a screen that is huge with you on it. And so you'll see me talking to you on the camera soon. Okay.
Imagine you there. My headphones aren't working. I'm going to pick up more of the surrounding sound, which is birds and maybe kids playing. And I apologize. This is the quietest spot I could find. We are on vacation in LA.
It's a beautiful spot.
And told this eyeball. Oh.
Yeah.
That video is
Yeah.
video with his internet connection.
So you're frozen for us now, John. Is there? There you are.
John, can you hear us? That means he just dropped off.
Uh-oh. So it's the connection on his end.
His connection.
Yeah. He's outside.
And it's
Yeah. This is why we start a few minutes early.
what's that?
That's why you start a few minutes early, right? Okay, there you are. Can you hear us again? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Laptop's going to pick up.
Okay.
Here it is. One.
Okay. Yeah. It's a tiny bit, you're a tiny bit buffering, John, so it's like freezing for a moment, but then catching it again. Just because of the connection, I think.
Let me move. Let me move a little bit closer to the house and the Wi-Fi.
Okay.
Hold on just a second.
Okay, that'll probably help. Hi. Oh no, really? Because of that? Oh my gosh.
How are we doing now? Any better?
Yeah, it seems better. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
All right, let's give it a second and we'll get started.
Okay. I've got Mike's roadmap.
Just give me 1 second.
Sure. I'm ready. Good morning, everybody. I'm Lucy Bickford. I'm here to host our Faith at Work session today. We have a nice in-person group here. I know many more are watching online. And we have a hybrid in-person and virtual experience today because our guest, John Rose, is on vacation and joining us by Zoom. I think that's seamless for everybody who's watching online. This is our well over 100th Faith at Work session. This program started in 2009, and we're thrilled that John Rose is here for a discussion today. I'm going to introduce John in a moment, but wanted to start by letting everybody know who's watching live that there should be an opportunity at the bottom of your screen to make a contribution to support the live streaming effort to keep this ministry going and to make it available. Thousands of people watch these sessions, so we know they're popular. People are enjoying them and getting a lot out of them. We certainly do, and we would love your support and to help keep it going. So there should be a QR code and a text to give prompt at the bottom of the screen if you're interested in supporting us, and thank you for doing it. We would like to start with a prayer from Mother Claire Makins.
Good morning, everyone. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love and work through our struggle to accomplish your purposes on earth. Lord, makes us instruments of your peace and channels of your love, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So John is a professor at Duke University, and he has a very interesting career. He's the Associate Director of the Civil Discourse Project at the Kenan Institute for Ethics at Duke. He teaches courses on interesting topics: happiness and human flourishing, Christian ethics, conservatism, and political polarization. He's also the author of a recent book that we'll get to hear about, Until Our Minds Rest in Thee: Open-Mindedness, Intellectual Diversity, and the Christian Life. We're really fortunate to have him here today and to hear about his education, his experience as a professor, and all the good thinking that went into his book, and also just about his family and his life. So thank you for being here, John. As most of our audience knows, these sessions typically center around 3 big themes. So one is getting to know your background, your life story, kind of who you are, and then in conjunction with that, your faith journey, which I know started at an early age for you, and then how you bring your faith to your work. So to get to know you a bit, John, would you tell us a bit about yourself, your family, your upbringing?
Lucy, thanks for having me here. Thanks for inviting me. I want to apologize in advance if there are noises of kids in the background. Not unrelated to my faith, a large family. I'm in this rather informal setting here. Hopefully all you hear is birds. So I'll start with my story. I'm from the Midwest. I was raised in a sort of Garrison Keillor, Lake Wobegon Lutheran culture, if you know anything about that. Heavy on original sin. Winter was good for you because it reminded you of your humility, that you're not God, and so on and so forth. And I went through all my college as a Lutheran. I attended Wabash College and majored in religious studies. Not long after that, I found my way to Duke Divinity School, where I studied under a couple Catholics. Around that time, I ended up becoming Catholic, and then from there, went to Princeton Seminary, another Protestant institution. I've only attended Protestant institutions, and did my PhD in theological ethics. And I met my wife around that time. Briefly, I thought maybe I'd be a Lutheran minister, and very briefly thought maybe I had a vocation to be a priest. I met my wife. She had other ideas, told me I did not have a vocation. She was right. or rather my vocation was to be a father and a husband. So we married, and we have 5 young children, again, whom you may hear in the background, and are with us on vacation here. And so that's the basic outline of my religious biography. Maybe I'll pause there.
Thank you, thank you. Well, so after all of that theological training and deep thinking and keeping going in that line of your education, how did you end up where you are, not being a priest or theological scholar, but teaching at a secular university?
Yeah, it's an unlikely path. When I tell people around Duke that I have a PhD in theology, they're surprised, because while I do teach a class in Christian ethics, I spend more time teaching classes on politics. And I joke that one of these days somebody's going to walk into my classroom from the administration and say, you know, we finally looked at the paperwork, and it turns out you're not qualified to teach this. But it's too late. The classes are on the books, and they've been successful. But no, I joke. The fact of the matter is, maybe we'll come back to this later, but I did write this dissertation on intellectual virtues. It got me thinking about the problem of polarization. That led me to finally offer a class, an experimental seminar at Duke, after I'd been there about a year, it was called How to Think in an Age of Political Polarization. So the idea was, we're not talking well. If I would put this in kind of theological language, we as Christians spend a lot of time debating about what our position should be on things, rather than talking about how we should just be talking in general, regardless of our positions. And my students were self-censoring in large number, weren't able to have conversations. And so I said, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to teach a class about how to have civil discourse around difficult topics. And it's true that this is a departure from kind of straight theology, but it is entirely unrelated to my story, in that I was looking at intellectual virtues from a Christian standpoint. And in my class, the Martin Luther King Jr. is the hero, the exemplar, and his sermon on loving your enemies is kind of foregrounded in the syllabus. And I really do challenge my students to at least take seriously the possibility of loving their enemies. And my students know I'm a Christian. They know that for me, there's a Christian motivation, and it's clear for King too. If you read his sermons, my students by and large are not Christians, or either not or are former Christians. It's kind of lapsed in a liminal space. We can talk more about that later. But the message still resonates with them. There's something about it they understand. So how did I get there? I think I was a Christian who found myself in an institute for ethics, not in a divinity school. Looked around and saw a problem and said, I'm going to teach on this, even if I don't have a degree in political science. I will say this, though. Nobody goes and gets a PhD in civil discourse. So it's not as though there are people who are particularly qualified to teach the class I'm teaching, which is in part, I think, the reason why not many people do teach it. It's actually hard to find faculty who will teach a class like mine or teach political topics like mine, because they're touchy, and again, nobody's specialized in it. Things can go wrong, and I think that my faith led me, I think, in part to do it, and I think it shines through in moments. I hope it does, but it's not an explicitly Christian class, and I don't necessarily teach it in a way that it's only for Christians. Certainly not. It's for everyone.
And so you mentioned things can go wrong. So maybe we can ask, in your teaching, before kind of getting into the topics that you teach or your interactions with your students, knowing things could go wrong on any of the topics that you're encountering, with young people who have, strong opinions and also, are really engaged, smart people who want to engage with the topics you're raising. What if things go wrong? And how do you bring faith to your own experience as a professor in that environment, putting yourself there?
So I preach charity in my class. One thing that I think makes my class a little different from other classes, perhaps in civil discourse, is that it's unapologetically normative. I think sometimes people say, well, we just need to be more rational, right? If we're just rational, then we won't fight and just get the facts right. I think we need to be rational, but I think there's a a place, for emotion, but also I think we need to be able to use language like charity, humility. I even use the language of grace in my class. So I tell my students, I want you to tolerate opinions you don't like, but I don't mean tolerance as an indifference. Like, I don't really care what you think, so long as, you don't get in my way or something like this. I mean something more like a patient forbearance of a perceived wrong or disagreement for the sake of keeping alive life together, for the sake of making possible friendship. Because I do think Christians want to be of one mind with other people. And I think we lament the fact that we disagree. We can come back to this, and this is in my book. And so I tell my students, charity means many things, but in my class it means, trying to hear the other person in what seems to you the most reasonable possible terms, because you can interpret things in a different way. Talking in a way where we keep the conversation going, we keep the possibility of friendship. It doesn't mean we're going to agree about everything. And if you act in a way where it's clear you're not trying to humiliate the other side, or in the parlance of my students, own the other side, but rather, and you can convey this in the way you talk and how you respond. You don't go for the jugular. People say, oh, so, this person is on about something else, rather than just trying to win the argument. And that's one way charity expresses itself in conversation. And so I think that really changes the environment, and it changes how we talk about difficult issues, and it makes possible difficult conversations that I think otherwise wouldn't be possible. And I think that's part of the kind of secret sauce to my class. It's not my secret. I mean, I really do think it emerges out of my Christian faith. But charity is something I think everybody understands, and they want to be in a more loving environment. I think, for Christians, the other way this charity shows itself is in forgiveness. In kind of, if somebody does something wrong, they're not out. They're not ostracized. I'll tell my students, this is my class is kind of the anti-cancel culture class. And I think, particularly for Christians, I think there's something about cancel culture that ought to not sit well with us. I think Cornel West has this line about the Christians believe in the absolute condemnation of no one. In part because we were all canceled once. And so, we believe in forgiveness. We don't believe in shunning someone forever. We want them to be part of the community. We're not interested in making sacrifices of other people. The perfect sacrifice has already been made. And so I think Christians have something to offer here in response to this kind of cancel culture attitude. I think one telling feature of what's going on with this cancel culture is that there is no coming back. At least I observe instances of this. People on Twitter or whatever are quote unquote canceled, and there's no coming back. Like, you're done, and it's there forever on the internet, and it lacks, I think secular lacks this mechanism. I'm Catholic, we have penance, but the other Christians have other versions of this where you can come back, and it seems like there's no coming back in this kind of more secular version of cancellation. Maybe I'll pause there. I've been talking for a while.
No, it's fascinating to hear it. Thank you. So maybe getting more into what it's like in your classroom teaching, do you have any particular, well, I guess, could you tell us about your students first, kind of who's signing up for your classes? You've already mentioned they're not necessarily all Christians. Presumably they come from all backgrounds, and some are probably not particularly religious at all. And so you just tell us about kind of who you're working with in a given classroom. Oh, we just lost you. Okay.
Sorry about that. I muted myself. I should not do that, I realize. Only the us can unmute. You have the power.
You're back.
So different classes. So I do teach a class on Christian ethics. In that class, I get a lot of students who were raised Christian, maybe who have some issues with institutional religion, but feel as though maybe they don't know the entire story of the religion from which they've drifted, and they want to take another look, and they want to look at it in an academic environment in which they can be a skeptic and they can push back. And I began that class the first day saying that this is not Sunday school. There are no forced baptisms. I do want you to help you understand how Christians think. And I myself am a Christian. I think I owe it to you to tell you that. Let's look at this tradition and see how its inner thinking leads people of this faith to approach difficult topics, like, say, just war, or economics, should we be capitalists, and so on and so forth. So that's that student. Then I teach this polarization class. Those students, I think, self-select a bit. They're students who perhaps are kind of hurting from polarization. Maybe they've had a damaged friendship because of politics. It could be grandpa, it could be mom, dad, or a friend. They've had a falling out. Or they're students who are frustrated by the fact that there doesn't seem to be any productive conversation going on. Their social media, which we all know tends to not be productive at all. Excuse me. Or just in interpersonal conversations with other people, it just seems like whenever you get on a tough topic, people either get quiet, or it gets awkward, and that's the end of it. Whatever, it doesn't go well. And then I have some students who, let's say, are a little bit of kind of dissidents on campus on maybe one or two issues, and they're looking for a space in which they feel free to express that view without there being social penalty. And I get them. I'll confess to this, I even sometimes recruit those students into class. There's a lot of interest in the class. I have as many students as I want, and there's a wait list. But so sometimes I give permission numbers to students I know will bring a bit of viewpoint diversity to the room, because I think that's a good thing, provided they're not kind of provocateurs, but they have contrarian views. So those are my students. They're looking for more honest conversation. They're looking for a different classroom environment. They're looking for, I use this phrase, a wider Overton window. This is a concept that I think it comes from the economics, but we all use it now. It just means the range of kind of socially acceptable views within a given context. So you get on a tough topic like race, and you say, well, what's in bounds, what's out of bounds? It often isn't stated. You kind of feel it, right? And so when you get on race, is it considered immoral to believe in color blindness, let's say? Well, that depends. Is this a small collection of friends who skew this way politically? Is it just Twitter? What is it? And then, so in my classroom, I tried to kind of expand the Overton window to allow more people into the conversation, to make it more interesting, to make it, we talk a lot about campuses looking like America. I want mine to sound a little bit more like America, not just look like it. Because my feeling is that the real conversation around these issues, and when I say real, I mean people are being honest, people are being charitable, they're really trying to listen. I don't think it's happening in red America, I don't think it's happening in blue America, so I want it to happen in my classroom. Part of the reason it's not happening is people are sorting so much. Sociologists use this term, sorting. They're moving to certain zip codes in which people share their worldview. Roughly tracks politics. They shop at certain stores, and they go to certain schools, and so on and so forth. And so we've kind of siloed ourselves. All of us have. And there's an internet version of this too, depending on what algorithm you're on, where we don't really have to interact with other people. And I think it's sad that, if I can say this, that I think Christian denominations have kind of done the same thing. We've sorted ourselves politically, so time and again, denominations will split over, seems like the same issues. Rather than trying to see if you can hold it together, they just go separate ways. And so we see a mirror version of this in our religious institutions. I'm Catholic, I mentioned that. I mean, the thing about being Catholic is like it's supposed to work this way, is that you have to stay together. You have to try to keep the church together, even when there's vehement disagreement. And the question often becomes, at what point would that become intolerable? If the Pope said something like this, or the church went this direction, it's a hard question. But at least in theory, you try to stay in, but it's difficult. So you began by asking me what my students are like, and here I am talking about the church.
That's good.
But I got off topic. I'll stop there and let you ask another question.
Oh, no, it's good. Well, do you have any anecdotes from the classroom that you can share? We'd love to hear about anything that stands out to you as that you think this audience would benefit from, but that shows the impact that the class has on students in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I tell many stories. I mean, I've had students who disagreed over Israel, Jewish students or friends, and took the class and kind of came to see each other's worldview a little bit better. I've had students come to my class and then they write in their later reflections. I thought I had this. I read this reflection recently. Young woman, and she said, I went into the class and on the first couple days, I was playing this game with a friend of mine, and the game was figure out who the Republican is. See if we can figure out who the Republican is, right? And out this person. And she wrote in her reflection, I realized early on in the tenor of the class that that's not what this class was about at all. That's not what we're doing here. I really just want to try to understand these people. And that to me was a sign of, okay, she got the class. I had an interesting conversation one time with students in which we got on the subject of immigration. My students tend to skew progressive, and I think students were kind of afraid of arguing for anything other than an open border, lest they be accused of being uncaring. And finally, I had a student say, actually, I'm for rather tight, much tighter immigration control. It turned out that this student was Haitian. He was black, so he was the only immigrant student in the class. And this really scrambled the board, and I could tell my students other students were surprised, but that was a really good moment for them, because this is an issue, those who studied it, that immigrants have kind of, it's surprising to some, that they're not as in favor of open borders as you might think. And so this was an instance in which I think my students got to hear a little bit more of America. And they tend to be kind of insulated from this on college campuses. And it was a great example in which I think, because the student happened also to be a racial minority, it was difficult for them to make it, an issue of race. And so they were forced to kind of have to make a moral argument that didn't rely on some of the usual arguments for why we should have open borders. So I was particularly proud of that moment. I thought the class was successful, and they really had to think harder about their positions on immigration. As a result of this, one young man who I got to say, in my class I preach courage. He had the courage to say this is what he thought on this issue, and that was great. I was proud of him. Stop there.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. And have any students shared with you any impact that your class has had on their other classes, the way they approach topics that they may otherwise have been silent about, or even social conversations?
Yeah, it's funny. I have to be careful because I do tell them, I said, go forth and now see if you can bring this to other classes. But I should tell them you should do it gradually. I had an instance where this young woman came up to me. She had taken my class, and she was on women's athletic team at Duke, and she took it with another young woman who was also on that team. Okay, so we had a day in which we discussed transgender athletes, and one of these young women, who was quite involved actually with our Black Lives Matter movement on campus, was basically said, I think it's unfair. I think it's unfair to include transgender athletes in women's sports, and here's why. And she gave an example, which I won't go into. It takes some time. And the other student agreed, and there were a number of students in the room who agreed. I have to say this was a first-year seminar, and I taught it a couple years ago, and I think the students were a little unaware of how that's kind of an unpopular position. Interestingly, I think it's becoming more popular. We can go into that, but at the time it was pretty socially unpopular. So she didn't know any better, so she left the class, and she ended up in a conversation with a junior on this topic, and it was quite forthright and pretty confident in her view on this matter, and it did not go well. It did not go well at all. And she later recounted this experience to me, and I said, did you kind of keep your calm? Were you charitable? She says I was, but the last thing she said to this other young woman is, you just need to take a class with Professor Rose. That's what she said. Then she walked away, or that was the end of it. I thought that was kind of a funny example.
We should all get to take a class with Professor Rose. Well, thank you for that. So we would love to hear about your book that I think you wrote a couple of years ago, but we'd love to hear about the topics that you unravel in the book. I think we may even have an image of it to put up.
Look at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there it is.
One 5-star review, and I'm pretty sure
5
my
stars.
brother wrote it. I'm not sure. It's good that it's being recorded. Yeah. So I was at Princeton Seminary. I started thinking about the intellectual virtue, particularly open-mindedness. We think about that as a virtue, and then I started asking myself, in what sense is that a virtue? I mean, there are various ways you can define it. And surely there are some ways in which it isn't a virtue, right? So if you think open-mindedness means like everything is on the table, right? I'm open to any view I'm going to take seriously. The more I thought about it, I was slightly uncomfortable with that. I mean, there are certain views where you say, am I going to take seriously the idea that the intentional taking of an innocent human life, what we think of as murder, is okay. I'm not sure that's a view we want to say has a seat at the table. So I started saying, well, what is this virtue, if it is a virtue? And so I kind of narrowed it down. This is how virtue ethicists work. You kind of discard possible definitions. Not this, not that. And the one I came up with was something like a kind of expansive openness to learning from as wide as possible source of text and people and experiences that may revise your own views. And so it's a kind of openness to learning, I think of it when I think of open-mindedness. I wanted to get also away from, I guess, this kind of was kind of a strong fallibilism, which is like every belief I have, I don't really know how strongly I believe it. One of the reasons I thought this can't be right is also because I'm a Christian. And so when I started thinking about faith, I thought, when I think about the Christian faith, is it that I want to hold all my beliefs lightly? I don't think I do. I think we aspire to a strong faith in which we don't. We allow for our to have doubts. It's part of being human, and we want to ask hard questions of our faith for sure. Scrutinize it. But I was uncomfortable with the kind of idea of open-mindedness, like, wow, do we really know anything? That didn't seem right to me. And I don't think that's quite right, even if you're a non-Christian. I think we have sort of kind of strong moral convictions we don't want to give up. So that was one bit of it. The other bit of it was intellectual diversity, by which I mean a kind of encounter with or living amongst divergent views. And this can take the form of just surrounding yourself with other ideas and always kind of having to think about them. But better yet, I think people who hold those views. And so I was asking myself, what is the argument for this? And there are various justifications given. They all kind of interestingly rely upon certain kind of metaphors. So one utilitarian argument for how intellectual diversity gets you to truth is it's kind of a Darwinian view. Like the survival of the fittest, ideas survive. Another one relies upon the marketplace of ideas, the idea that maybe like ideas are kind of bought and sold, and let's wait and see what people buy. If you look at U.S. jurisprudence, like Oliver Wendell Holmes's opinions, you see this metaphor. Another argument, sword sharpens sword, and so on and so forth. And, I wrote some things in that book. I don't know. I still agree with. I still think through them. I hope this is kind of consistent with trying to be intellectually humble. But I found all those arguments a little bit question begging, and because I think it's a little unclear that any of those metaphors are really appropriate to the way we come to believe things as human beings. And so I finally came down with the view that intellectual diversity is something that naturally kind of supervenes upon being open-minded. If you recall my earlier definition of open-minded, I just think naturally if you are open-minded in that way, you are going to find yourself in the company of intellectual diversity. And if you find yourself kind of completely shielded from outside views, chances are you're not being open-minded. And so I think it just naturally happens. Now, the kind of most speculative and, if it is interesting part in the book comes at the end when I think about the afterlife. And the way, I'm an Aristotelian and a Thomist, the way that Aristotelians and Thomists like to do things is they like to think about the end and then come back to the beginning. And then James, this is in Patterson, this great writer, has this master class on YouTube, and he's telling people kind of how to write a novel. He says, people always tell me they struggle, they don't know how to start it. And his advice to them is, tell me how you want it to finish, and then go back. And then the beginning will be a lot easier to you. So Aristotelians and Thomists kind of think this way philosophically. They say, what is like the final end of human beings? What are we made for ultimately? What is heaven? What is the beatitude? And then work it backwards. And now I'm going to tell you about kind of what are the virtues, and so on and so forth. So in this case, I started thinking about heaven, and I thought, do we want to be open-minded in heaven in the way that I described it? And this is interesting. I think in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, there's a thought that there's forever kind of learning in heaven, or because God is infinitely inexhaustible, there's ever more. I kind of come down on the kind of Augustine, I think. Others kind of want something like peace and finality, to kind of finally know the truth, and to take rest in this. And therefore, open-mindedness would go away. It would no longer be a virtue. It would no longer be necessary. We would be blissfully closed in our minds. And so we wouldn't be debating anymore about were the Anabaptists right about this or that, and we would know everything as befit our stature, our status within heaven. We wouldn't know as much as God, but our buckets would all be full, as we say. And so that was the open-minded bit. And then the intellectual diversity bit, I thought, well, if you think about it, I think Christians, I think intellectual diversity is an unfortunate thing, if by that we mean disagreement. And I started to think about it as more of an artifact of the fall, much like death, something that was not intended. And that's why we don't like it. It might even help explain why we're so frustrated by the fact that we can't convince people of our views, because like death, it was really never meant to be. And so in heaven, this similarly goes away. No more intellectual diversity, and it's a good thing. We are all finally of one mind and finally united. So anyways, that's, again, highly speculative, but if you think about it that way, it changes how you think about it in the here and now, intellectual diversity, that is. So not necessarily something to be celebrated, but to be lived with. Maybe I'll pause there. I see something in the chat about questions. Maybe people have questions, but that's the dissertation in a nutshell.
Well, thank you. That leaves us with a lot to think about. Let's take some questions. If there are any questions from this audience, or I'll get a message about the ones that are being asked online, or I've got more questions. Yes, we have one right here.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
So I'm going to ask a broad question. I'm interested in your innovative thoughts. Those of us that have been around for a long time remember the power of the churches post-World War II, great growth, pastors that many of them had served in combat were converted, extraordinary time of growth. Rolling forward, here we are today. The institutional value of vibrant churches was critical, I think, in stabilizing and making this a great post-world country. Now, we're facing decline in membership, churches, closing of churches, particularly what I would call the liberal, the Episcopal, Presbyterian, etc. I'm interested in your fresh thoughts on what we could do to revive churches. That's assuming that you agree that that would be great for America at this time.
Well, first of all, I think it would be unchristian to say that the dying of the churches is a good thing, and clearly they need to regrow. I don't think we have to make the argument in terms of America. It's just in terms of the Great Commission. I think it's sad that the mainline Protestantism is in decline. Some people say it's dying. Episcopalian Church is struggling. Why is this? There's a lot of finger pointing. Depends who you ask, right? Conservatives will say because we became so wishy-washy, faith was optional, and at least the evangelicals were serious about the faith bit. But there are good responses to that. I think there's a general decline in religiosity in America across the board, and in the wealthier countries in Europe. And so, what's this about? My first great kind of professor was a Presbyterian named William Plaker. His books are still in print. They're wonderful. I recommend them. But I was talking to him once about the growth of Christianity in the global South, which is remarkable. And he said, well, John, God goes where he's needed. And by that, he simply meant, in countries become wealthy, I think we come to, this is the oldest sin, it's pride. We think we're too smart for God. We become wealthy and we think we don't need God. And sadly, I think human nature is such that people can stop going to church, can stop worshiping God because they simply become too comfortable. They have it so good. And but that doesn't answer your question, which is, well, then what's to be done about it? It's difficult. I think as Christians, Mother Teresa once said, it's not our job to be successful, it's our job to be faithful. Success is God's business. And who knows, if you're faithful in you try to bear witness in your own small actions in life, and you continue going to church and do what you can for the Church of the Holy Spirit there in Chicago, that's all you can do. It's not necessarily your job to figure out how to make America a more Christian country again. I don't know that we have the capacity to do that, and that's humbling. But I would say also pay attention to kind of where there is good news. And America's gonna, because of immigration and because of where these people are coming from, is going to be a very different country in another 20, 30 years. And there's going to be and I don't know how this is all going to play out. The people who come here are going to be much more religious, not just Christian, Muslim too. And that's going to create some real kind of cultural tension within our country, in as much as our, I don't like this phrase elite, but our elite has become quite secular. And so how does that all play out? I do not know. But I would just say, all you can do is pray and preach the gospel and try to do well at your church, and God knows how this is all going to play out in America. But I am against this idea that, well, maybe it isn't such a bad thing that the churches are dying off. That I oppose, and I think there's scriptural warrant for opposing that. I see a version of this sometimes on campus where people think evangelization is like inappropriate. It's like a dirty word. And this I oppose. I don't think so.
Thank you. Another question from here in the audience.
John, thank you very much. That was wonderful. My name is Mike Zafrovsky. I have 3 sons. We have 3 sons, 4 Duke degrees. So unfortunately, our sons are closer to your age, so they could not have you as a professor, but very, very impressed. Actually, I'll be at Duke August 9th and 10th. For
Wonderful.
Coach K's leadership session, I'm looking forward to meet Luke Powery in person.
Yes,
He does a
he's
great
great.
job at the Duke Chapel. But question for you is that some of your role models and mentors, particularly on the faith side, some of my people are C.S. Lewis, Tim Keller. Look forward to go to his funeral a couple weeks from now. And also David Miller at Princeton. I think he teaches a course similar to what you have. So, love to get your comments on mentors and role models and any views on those 3 gentlemen, C.S. Lewis, Tim Keller, and David Miller.
All very different, all wonderful. I met David Miller once. He, of course, has this Faith at Work project at Princeton. I went to one of those events. And Tim Keller, gosh, I mean, I don't know who said, he fought the good fight and finished the race, didn't he? And what he just did amazing things for so many people there in New York and beyond. C.S. Lewis is all over my syllabi. And in my Christian ethics class, I assign a lot, almost the entire thing, of his book, Mere Christianity. And I got to tell you, it's effective. Students who are not Christian, or again, who have kind of fallen away and weren't well catechized, read that book, and it's written in a way that's it's earnest, it's simple, but not simplistic. Simple as in clear, accessible, and he makes these arguments about why there has to be a moral law and questions about where this comes from that students get. And I love Lewis. I'm actually reading his book Paralandra right now. I've never read it before, the Space Trilogy, and that's an interesting set of books. But no, I'm a big fan. As for my own personal influences, I guess I'm kind of old school. I guess Augustine, the Confessions is a great book to give to undergraduates because they don't know what to do with it at first. They're not sure, is this autobiography? Is it a sermon? What the heck is this thing? And he really puts it to them about, do we long for God? Is this ultimately why we're so restless? And it's a message or question I can pose to my students, even in a secular environment, that they know they need to look at it. They can't dismiss, because they are on this endless meritocratic treadmill in which I think a lot of them feel like doesn't really bring the happiness they thought it would, because there's always another thing. You got to prove yourself. It's ephemeral, right? And so they're longing for this thing they can't name, but what the meritocracy is giving them isn't enough. It's why I think so many of them have depression and anxiety, very high level, elite school. And so I like the guy, put it to it. I'll stop there.
Any other questions from this audience? Mike's got another one.
This is Mike Zafrowski again. I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, but one of Tim Keller's sermons, he makes the comment, which I found it personally useful, the comment of, you have to integrate in any society, but do not assimilate. And I always found it to be quite useful, if you will, the whole concept of you do not have to be of the world, but how do you bring your values and be part of the world? So integrate, but do not assimilate. I've always found to be quite useful. Love to get your perspective on that.
It's a tension that the Christians have been dealing with since the beginning. Do you circumcise them? It's just like, what does it mean to be a particular people with a particular God and a particular story in a world that doesn't necessarily share it, but in a world in which you live? We are resident aliens, right? And we are in the world but not of the world. It's this tension, and you can go too far this way or that way. I think we can disagree about it, while I think as Christians, hopefully all recognizing that these are the poles, and we're trying to do both. And so some people are gonna, the Amish at one end, and then we can point to other examples of Christians kind of way at the other end, living in the world. And so I think the important thing is to recognize the tension, and that we should never lose our distinctiveness, but also realize that we do owe things to the world. We are of the way. We want to make the world a better place. We want to reach out to non-Christians. We have these responsibilities, but we can never allow ourselves to be, as you use the word, assimilated, but just to be made like everyone else. And I think this is a danger in pluralism, or I should say, some Christians think the ethical response to pluralism is to somehow be less Christian. And I don't believe that. I think, I mentioned tolerance and how I defined it earlier as a virtue. The important thing is, I would say I believe in that virtue because I'm a Christian, right? So I'm in this pluralist world. I'm not going to use violence to force you to believe what I think, but that's not because I'm less Christian. It's because I am Christian. I don't think my God is pleased by forced conversions, right? And so I want to live in peace with people who have disagreement. I want to change their minds and their hearts, right? Not by force. So I think the key is always saying, what is the motivation for this? Of what story are you part of when you say, I want to be tolerant, I want to be this, right? And I think it needs to be rooted in your Christian faith. Does that make sense? So in that way, you're not assimilated in the bad way. I see a question here on meeting chat. Should I try to answer that? I can read it quickly.
Please.
Firm believer in faith and politics. How do you recommend engaging in a place that is increasingly seeking polarization over reconciliation? Sometimes I get a student every once in a while who will stop me and say, I don't know, you're talking about polarization like it's a bad thing. I think it's good. Like, let's just have it out. That's an interesting question. I think that human beings, it's kind of a natural law wager on my part. I don't think what we want finally is a kind of a constantly kind of warring life. I think what we long for is something like what Augustine calls peace, and not just intellectual peace, but real peace. And even when we fight wars, it's for the sake of peace. What ultimately do you want after that, right? So tell me what you really desire. The approximate desires, and all, well, why do you want that? Why do you want? Ultimately, I think we do want peace. So even when a student says, well, I'm for polarization, really what they mean, you tease it out, is that they want to win, and then they want some kind of peace of their own kind and choosing that they don't think they can have apart from war. So I think it's good to kind of get that out of them, right? So what they really want isn't polarization. If they do say, no, I relish the fight. I just love this. I guess this is not the answer they want, but I say, well, how's that working for you? That is, people who are just in this combat mode, and you see them on social media, maybe you have it in yourself sometimes, they're not happy. Like, this is not really the life they want for themselves. And you feel ultimately, David Brooks was at Duke a couple years ago, and he was talking about polarization and how one feature of it is that politics is everything to you. And he says politics becomes like a drug in which you constantly having to give more of yourself, and then you're getting less back until in the end you're giving everything and getting nothing back, right? And I think this is a feature of polarization, and Christians have an explanation for this. It's because our ultimate hopes and our sense of meaning and purpose, it doesn't ultimately lie in politics, it's in God. And so a belief in God and that cosmology puts politics in its place. It has a place, it's not unimportant, but it's less important, right? And when you put it in its place, then the polarization looks different. And then also I will say differences become more tolerable. Right? If all there is politics, then it's easier to give into this idea that we got to fight to the death, because that's all there is. And the Marxists thought this, right? Christians don't think this. We have a different attitude towards politics. And here again, Augustine in his work, City of God, I mean, makes this clear, right? It's a lesser place, and we have to always see it as such. So, any other questions?
We have, oh.
Thank you so much. It's been fascinating to listen to this. My name is Claire Makins. I'm the vice rector here at Church of the Holy Spirit. You mentioned very briefly at the beginning where you are and your family, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about them real quick, and also if you would tell folks who are joining us where you are.
Yeah, I'm on Green Lake in Spicer, Minnesota, visiting my father, and I'm actually looking at my toddler just right here. And I have 5 young children, not unrelated to my Catholic faith. We're very open to life, and this is something that you might hear a toddler screaming right now. That is increasingly countercultural, and my students do take note of it because I tell them about my family, and I bring them over at the end of the semester, and they meet my family, and I do, one thing I preach, I get away with is the good of marriage and children. And I started at a young age, and I'm very committed to my family. I spend a lot of time with my family. Being an academic gives me the kind of flexibility where I can be home a lot. We do homeschool our children as well. My students know all this, so I'm very kind of pro-family and pro-marriage. And my students find that like this really again, interesting and probably not so common among people in kind of my position at schools like Duke, but even more uncommon that I just talk about it, and they're really intrigued. It's kind of interesting. I had a student, I was telling Lucy this story, students, aren't you worried about getting canceled? Because, I talk about really controversial things. And I say, well, my sense of kind of security in life isn't found in my job. If I got canceled, I have my faith and my family and my church, and they know who I am, right? And so I'm not worried about this. And I had a young woman come up to me after class, and she was almost sad, and she said, that was beautiful what you said, but you have to understand. So for somebody like me, I'm not a person of faith. I don't really plan on getting married anytime young in life, if ever, and I already know I don't want to have children, and so those things aren't options to me as forms of identity and security. All I have is my Duke degree, my CV, basically my earning power. That's it. That's my security in life. It was so sad, and I thought to myself afterwards, of course that's not true. I mean, she does have this option. She does have that in theory she could be a person fit, but she felt as though they weren't option. And to me, it was just an example of kind of where a lot of young people are at today. Even the ones who are winning, who have won in the meritocracy, a lot of them are hurting, and they